And so the talk today is around privacy. So is privacy dead? Not so fast. Oh, 2010, we had many of the tech leaders advise us that privacy is dead, get over it. And what we see, our social norms are changing. There's surveillance capitalism is now a business model. Information's commodified, monetized. It's a way of making money. We also have a lot of what you would call personalization, but really it's targeted advertising, and they say they want to make us have a better experience. And also there's a perceived convenience. Nothing is free, but I can use this free app, and really what I'm doing is giving away my personal information. The other thing we've seen is courts have ruled no expectation of privacy on social media. Next slide, please. So why save privacy? Well, when you look at why we have privacy, it protects us from unwanted pressures, abuses of power. It allows us to be autonomous. We can freely explore ideas without surveillance. We have a democratic society that only functions when we are autonomous, and we need the ability to govern ourselves. Also, privacy can be empowering, allowing for self-determination. And we know that a culture of exposure can damage society with discrimination and bias. And as recent as 2021, the Privacy Commissioner in the UK did a research survey that said 77% of people say protecting personal information is essential. And also, the decisions we make about privacy today will affect our society and our future, and even the future of humanity for decades to come. Next slide, please. And also, privacy is a human right. It's a fundamental right that we enjoy in a democratic society. And as you see on the slide, it really cascades down from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights at the UN. And it's spread internationally. It's in the US Constitution, and you have to look for it because we're talking about privacy of personal information. And so there's privacy of person in a physical world. And what we have morphed to is, of course, privacy in a digital world. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, again, privacy is a human right. Next slide, please. The GDPR, that's the General Data Protection Regulation, legislation coming out of the European Union. That legislation defined information rights. And as you can see here, there is a list of rights that we have and we enjoy as autonomous people. And so for the first time, we've had legislation really define the rights that we have around protecting our personal information. Next slide, please. So when do I have the right to privacy? Well, as they say, it depends, because privacy is contextual. So when you're looking at privacy law, it's around a reasonable expectation. And that would be what a common sense, reasonable person would expect. That's really around, your basic common expectation. So inside my home, I have a high expectation of privacy, and that is supported by criminal code, by laws, that you couldn't have a drone come and look inside my window because that is an invasion of my privacy. So when I'm walking outside though, and we know there's CCTVs, etc., out there, the surveillance, my expectation of privacy is lower. When I get to social media, like I mentioned, the courts say no expectation of privacy, but that's if I voluntarily post something. If somebody posts something about me without my permission, then they're invading my privacy. And we've seen the courts determine, especially around revenge porn and the kinds of things that are posted without a person's consent. So that would be kind of a balance relative to social media and my privacy expectations. Next slide, please. So the Information Privacy Commissioner for the UK, Elizabeth Denham, used to be our privacy commissioner here in BC. She just published, her office published a recent report, and they surveyed a large number of people, and this of course would be UK specific. But what's important here is over the past 5 years, they've seen a real growth in the number of people that have trust and confidence in businesses and organizations in how they manage our personal information. That's really important. It's showing a trend line of trust. And why is it important? Because it allows us to continue to drive innovation, and it also provides an opportunity for people in society. So if you trust organizations, then you will conduct transactions and commerce with them. So you can see how a positive trust model has a lot of benefits for not only advancing technology, but also for our societal norms. Of course, the reverse is true. If I think that you can't protect my personal information, the chances of me continuing a relationship with you is very low because I don't trust you. And trust is like an either or. I don't trust you a little bit or a lot. No, I either trust you or I don't. So this is 2021, which was encouraging to see that it's actually a trend line over 5 years. Next slide, please. So what's changed? Okay, is privacy dead? No, but what's changed? Well, legislation. First of all, the GDPR. It was implemented in 2018. It's only 3 years ago. And so what it prohibits is this whole business about opacity, black box. Okay, now people need to know how you're using and processing their information. They actually can say, stop it. You can't process my information. And there has to be mechanisms to allow me to withdraw my information. Also adequacy. So Canada enjoyed, from 2018 to now, adequacy. We have to have adequacy with the GDPR. Well, we don't. We have partial. Okay, right now we have a digital charter that is going through the Parliament. It's not been passed yet, but that will affect us federally and also provincially here in BC, because our PIPA will have to now match up with the federal, which is of course looking for adequacy with the GDPR. The technical design requirements. Okay, so now we're pushing technical design to say, okay, you'll have to have privacy by default. Privacy by design is a Canadian concept. It was developed by Dr. Ann Cavoukian, who now works at Ryerson, and it's been adopted into the GDPR, which really is a significant advancement. What you have on the other side, of course, is technology saying, how do we prove this, right? So we'll probably looking at standards and some type of auditability and so forth. What we're seeing, of course, is the GDPR is now influencing even a mom and pop online store. For example, if I'm collecting information about someone who lives in the EU, I'd better be compliant with the data protection, the protection regulation. I have to do that. Why? Because I'm collecting information about an EU citizen. So it's really changed global practices from big corporations down to any online. And also what we're seeing is a universal change worldwide in privacy legislation. Next slide, please. So what else has changed? Enforcement. You're probably seeing this in the papers. So what we're seeing in trend lines saying more countries are adopting legislation that would be adequate or have adequacy with the GDPR, because we're talking about global commerce. And also, for example, the GDPR in 2 years, they are enforcing, they are publishing now, and you could see they generate 114 million euros in 2 years of just being implemented. But look at the next line. The Federal Trade Commission, they enforced a 5 billion penalty on Facebook, and that was last year. So you can see where the enforcement, the penalties, they are getting serious, okay? And the OECD, which again is looking at global trade, is really looking and saying, now we have privacy legislation that is really has teeth, and we can empower citizens, and we will enforce this. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so at this point in time, you may have noticed the little pictures in the corner. And so what I've done here is, these are pictures of fractals. And fractals, as you may know, they start out simple, and they work to more complexity. They're a pattern of chaos or dynamic change. And so I thought, you know, with technology, of course, we've gone from simple to more complex, but also about fractals. They're everywhere. So if you know what to look for, you'll see them everywhere. And that was the point I was wanting to make here, because privacy is everywhere. You just need to know where to look. So the next part of my presentation is going to be about some of the things that are obviously, they're around if you know where to look for them. So cookie banners, you all get these cookie banners. Why do you think that you have them? It's privacy related, and it has to do with GDPR. Next slide, please. Edge computing. You might know about edge computing. It's essentially data processing at source, which is great because you see data going over a jurisdictional boundary has implications for privacy, because not all privacy is equal. And so the provisions we enjoy here in Canada, when you're traveling, you know, there's variability around the world in privacy law. And so if you can process data at source, then that is a privacy protection. Also, you can see here the 5G networks. Okay, so that we're looking at data processing, we're looking at speed and response time, and using data and the cloud and so forth. All of those things allow us to use the National Institute for Standards and Technology, located in the United States, has become a real leader. President Obama had put in billions when he was president, and that initiated cybersecurity standards and a whole lot of other standards that have now evolved, and from a privacy security perspective, they're highly adopted internationally. So if we look here, the NIST standards for hardware-enabled security includes edge computing. That was last year. They now have upcoming 5G cybersecurity practice guide. Next slide, please. Privacy and AI. This is really interesting. This federated learning, you probably have heard about this, where you would take an artificial intelligence or machine learning algorithm, and instead of pulling the data into a big data pool to be able to troll through and to train algorithms and to develop a model, now you can you can send out the same algorithm into different data sets, and then after they've trolled the data and they've learned, they come back to the server, where now they integrate all of that learning. And so again, it's really looking at how do we protect data at source. Okay, next slide, please. Privacy and future, right? We need to stay ahead. So quantum computing, a nightmare for privacy and security, because essentially with quantum computing, all of our encryption algorithms would be at risk. And so what's happening is that the NIST already has a white paper out this year, just in April, and they're looking at, we're getting ready for quantum, because quantum is coming. But if we put quantum in without cryptography standards, then, you know, the whole privacy risk, I mean, it's elevated, and it was really a nightmare. But so I'm encouraged, and you can kind of see where they're trying to stay ahead of the curve. So next slide, please. Okay, there's a lot of privacy and security models out there. One is the zero trust model. We're seeing that with Microsoft, for example, and it has to do with cloud, has to do with segmentation, and it's really around never trust and always verify. So it's a different way, instead of having a whole network that, you know, that you're protecting the parameter. And so the old paradigm, now they're looking at segmentation. So essentially what you would do is authenticate the different, like the subject, the object, and the device, the mechanism. And so essentially, again, really narrowing down the access. So it's about least privilege. What, you know, how can I minimize the permissions you have, but allow you the information sharing with the principle of need to know. So it's that balance. And so you can see where there's new models coming up. The other thing I just wanted to point out here, NIST, again, really busy. And you can see these are 2021. So these are, everything is like, the stuff is coming out in droves. And so now we have trusted Internet of Things device network. So they're looking at layering onboarding security standards. So if you have a smart fridge, for example, should it always be on so that you can receive a patch? Or is there a different way that we can secure, from a security perspective, can we secure these Internet of Things devices? So that's, again, looking at how do we secure these. Telehealth, with the pandemic, telehealth was now, its adoption is wide. And so they're looking at that ecosystem and how do we protect that? Mobile device security. We've been working with bring your own device for a while, but now with devices, we're anticipating the phone, your phone is actually going to be like a tricorder. There's going to be so many ways we can use these mobile devices, and the reason being is because they're ubiquitous internationally. Cyber supply chain. You've seen where there's hacking on supply chains. Guess what? We're onto it. They're looking at how do they strengthen all of the members in a supply chain. Cybersecurity for commercial satellite operations. I put this one in because I thought it was interesting. So what we're seeing now is the technology for satellites is, the satellites themselves are very small, and the technology is such that they're very inexpensive, comparatively speaking. The other thing is the footprint in order to launch satellites is very small. 10 acres, for example, was what they were talking about in Hawaii. And so what we're seeing is there's going to be constellations of satellites that are going to be launched by business. And so you can see where cybersecurity is a critical component of that, especially, for the scale that we're talking about. Next slide, please. Okay, so here you're looking at, everyday privacy and security, multi-factor authentication. You're familiar with that, probably on your phone. Role-based access controls. That's the model you probably log into with business. Password complexity. Remember, you had to put in a symbol and a number and right? Encryption. We're familiar with encryption. Patch management. Microsoft sends you the patches saying update. Okay. Patch management in organizations is much larger, as you appreciate all the applications, but we're seeing that patch management, it can be a push or a pull, but it's all part of our own administration management. Opt-out policies, you've seen where you can unsubscribe and you can control some of your exposure. Complex privacy settings, we're seeing Apple, the new Apple phone really playing into complex privacy setting. And mobile app security, it's huge because, of course, as I mentioned, we're using our mobile apps for more and more, and it's really high adoption, point of service. It's really going to be a mechanism for us to do a lot of things. Next slide, please. Okay, so changing norms, the right to be forgotten. Okay, so started off with the GDPR in the EU, and then what we saw was, okay, Google could turn off, your the information, but it would only be in the European Union. If we were in the United States or Canada, we could search out that information, not a problem. But now look at what's happening. California Consumer Privacy Act, 2020, a game changer. Brazil, they call it the Brazilian GDPR. Asia, we're seeing a general trend where the consumers want their rights as far as information. So this is good. So the right to be forgotten is one of these changing social norms. People have an expectation that they can now control, or at least have the right to control their information. Next slide, please. We're also seeing a lot of new roles in privacy. GDPR, the data controller, data processor, and data protection officer, those came out of that legislation. We're also seeing a brand new designation called privacy engineer, and it's being certified. And what they do is they would be looking at the whole organizational data management, data assets, how the data flows. Again, it's value, right? If you're trying to extract the value out of your data assets. And so privacy engineers are now being, they're a thing, and they're being hired. And when the digital charter, if that goes through in Canada, there's some other new roles that are going to emerge. Next slide, please. This is another area of privacy and ethics. You're going to see privacy playing out in ethics relative to many things. So digital ethics is how we manage ourselves ethically. So if you're creating algorithms, for example, you're going to want to look at built-in bias. Digital ethics is also concerned with the way that technology is shaping our future and how we can shape our future. So I gave you 3 little examples of ethical questions. Is computer code speech? How should it be legislated? Is singularity real? And should we be worried about it? How do we combat digital monopolies? We're seeing that play out now in the antitrust investigations in the US, but it's even got a name called platform capitalism, where there's concern about innovation, and that if you have these companies that really snuff out innovation, they keep buying, so they buy and then they'll either use or retire or destroy whatever they bought, but they're controlling the market. So again, an ethical question. Next slide, please. And this was the thing Dr. Lee talked about AI. So what we're interested in privacy is intelligent agents, okay? And really, again, you have to ask the question, will the public trust decisions that are made by a digital intelligent agent? So there's 3 different classifications of what an intelligent agent would be. But the privacy folks, when they're looking at AI, this is one of the questions that they are dealing with around intelligent agents. And from a perspective of how are these decisions arrived at? So what we have right now is human oversight. And we have decision-making, decision support tools and so forth that are supporting our clinicians, for example. And you would have human oversight. So the privacy legislation now requires that if a decision is made, the person has the right to ask how that decision was arrived at. But if it's all done digitally, then what we're looking at is built-in bias. And how is that information going to be discriminatory? And so these other issues creep in around, will the public trust? Because if the public doesn't trust this, then, the slide I mentioned earlier, that trend line goes down, and then, innovation is stymied, and so on and so forth. So this is another area where privacy is looking into, and we have our, we're interested in the development in this area. Next slide, please. So what are some of the privacy challenges ahead? Well, I've put a few of them here. Facial recognition, surveillance, okay? I was at Clearwater. I mean, they essentially scavenged, they said 1 billion faces from the internet. And they said it's public domain, so not to worry about privacy. But then what they did is they offered this facial recognition software to police enforcement. And some of the police departments took them up on it. And so the privacy commissioners, when they found this out, I mean, they went after this to find out why are law enforcement's using facial recognition. Because you see, with the collection and use and disclosure of information, it has to be consistent and it has to follow the law. And so we're watching facial recognition surveillance because it's, again, a threat to privacy. Smart city surveillance, you probably saw that there was, Google wanted to have smart city. One was in Toronto. That didn't really take off because of the surveillance and the sensors, like everything would have been monitored. So we're not there yet. Ethics, as I mentioned, all that ethics around data, AI, how is, how are we providing non-biased decision-making? And also looking at employee monitoring. Now that's come up because of the remote working through the pandemic. We're seeing more and more that employers want to monitor their employees. So these are just some of the ones that are catching on the radar. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide, and I just wanted to pose this question because I'm curious. So why do people who have a high expectation of privacy inside their homes invite in privacy invasive technologies? And I've listed some of them here. A lot of the smart devices that are always on, always listening, always tracking, information going to third parties, private companies, and the terms of use is really a consent model. And who reads terms of use? I mean, they're so long. And privacy, well, they can say what they want with privacy, but unless they're being investigated, who's to know? So I'm just curious as to why, when we have a high expectation of privacy, why do we allow corporate into our homes to monitor us, our families, our behavior patterns, and so forth? So last slide, please. There we go. So I'll take questions. Thank you.